You are listening to Woodland Walks, a podcast for the Woodland Trust, presented by Adam Shaw. We protect and plant trees for people to enjoy, to fight climate change, and to help wildlife thrive.
Well, hello. In this podcast, I've had the delight of talking to what I think is one of the BBC's best broadcasters, Paddy O'Connell. He has his own long-running Radio 4 show called Broadcasting House. He has been a correspondent based in New York. He's been part of the presenting team of the Eurovision Song Contest. His Radio 4 programme Travels with Bob took him and his dog, the eponymous Bob, on a tour of Britain, and you'll often hear him presenting on Radio 2 as well as many other places. And for years we presented the TV programme Working Lunch together. He once memorised the Observer Book of Trees, he tells me, and although he's forgotten many of the finer points, he still finds a walk amongst the trees an important part of his day. So, before we got to the curious case of why he was memorising leaf shapes, I asked him how he got into broadcasting.
I suppose, Adam, one of the joys was working with you years ago on Working Lunch. We both had a sort of childish belief that we should not ever be allowed to do what we do. So as a child, I used to mend radios. I used to listen to the radio a lot. I shouldn't have listened to the things I listened to. Radio 4 when I was 10, Radio 3, Radio 2, Caroline, Laser 558, World Service when we lived abroad. I'd always been obsessed with radios, and then cassettes. And I used to mend cassettes for my friends, gluing the tape together when they came out like a bird's nest. So and as a boy, I used to get BBC sound effects records and make mini horror films in my grandmother's garden near Guildford. So I was just always obsessed with radio, cassettes, and sound.
And you said you lived abroad. Did you have a? Because wasn't your father in the army? He's in the armed forces.
He had been, and then during the war, which they, in a very British way, they called hostilities only, right. Which meant just for the war then. Just for the actual war. So after the hostilities ceased, he became an engineer in oil business, and he lived in the Middle East, and we lived with him out there for half the year. So that's where we started listening to the World Service and also the programs that were launched in the English language in the country we were living in. So inevitably, the radio was the internet, really.
It was interesting you say you lived abroad, because I know whenever it comes up to a big event, anniversaries of the landings on D-Day and stuff, that's always an important time for you, isn't it?
Yes, because my dad died in the 70s, and when I researched his life, I found out that he had landed at D-Day, and it was sufficiently long ago I discovered this, that I met many of his comrades. So I was sort of inducted really into memorial trips on coaches, which is completely exhausting in the company of, as then was, 80-year-olds, although they're now nearly 100. On the bus, off the bus, stand over here very seriously, then go over there and sing, and then have a drink, and then start all over again. So they made me their chairman of their group, very big honor. So for about 20 years, I've been very closely involved with D-Day veterans. And, you know, they're all about 98 now, the ones who left. But yes, you're quite right. I did have that. I've probably tapped you up for money in the past, Adam, asked you for a donation.
I'm sure I've been very generous. I've been very generous. We had great fun on Working Lunch, and you're one of the nicest people to have worked with. But more than that, I think there's a number of things that strike me about your broadcasting style and what I know of your career as well. And that, without doubt, you're the most principled broadcaster I've ever met or worked with. But I know there are a number of times when people in our position, we're faced with things which we think aren't quite right. But it's a tough industry, and probably the best thing is to keep quiet, head down, and carry on. But I know that you haven't done that. In a number of cases I know where you've gone, I don't believe this is right. This isn't the way to behave. I'm leaving. I'm not being part of that. I mean, why do you think that is? Why do you feel so strongly and act on it?
I think it's a sort of awful self-destructive system. I've just done it again, actually, and it's like a sort of character curse. Sometimes, you know, in media, they come up with the most dreadful suggestions. I mean, I remember them approaching me once to ask me to front a television program called should I be afraid of sausages? And I went to the meeting and I said, no, the answer to the question is no, I shouldn't be afraid of sausages. I can't present your program. I know there are food welfare issues. So how about, should we save the pig? Yes, I can do that program. But should I be afraid of sausages? No, I can't do that program. So inevitably, that's a small example from the past. But I've always found, I suppose, this dreadful eat your grandmother to get on the telly thing to be absolutely sickening. And I think all of us now know there are the people who've made it through talent, but there's a lot of people who've made it through stabbing their friends in the eyeball. I mean, I had to appear as your magician's assistant on Working Lunch. You'd done all the work. And I stood behind you in a feather boa. And this was a business program.
Yeah, I'm glad it still rankles, because I did all the hard work and you went, "Ta-da!" and everyone went, "Wasn't Paddy brilliant?" And I did the trick, and he just went, "Ta-da!"
You did so much. You did so much on that show. But people still talk to me about you on that program, you know.
But I think what's interesting, and I think comes over in the small sort of walk you recorded for us, there is something about your style where you talk and I laugh or I smile. There's just an engaging thing about you. I wonder if that's something you are conscious of, or that just happens.
Well, I think it's very chaotic. I always think there's a great risk of it going badly. I just had to sit in on a Radio 2 breakfast show, and the producers wondered, did I want a lot of texts? So I said, no, I don't really want a lot of texts, because I know there's a lot of listeners. I don't need to be told that Mary in Macclesfield's on the M3. I mean, I know she's on the M3 without even telling me. You know, so I'm looking for the bit where the listener connects with something that's going on, let it happen, you know, so that in actual fact, the biggest success of the week was the habit of naming gritters. So the listeners pretty soon started sending fabulous material. Instead of saying, can I have a shout out? I'm on the M6, which I'm not interested in the slightest. They started naming gritters after Radio 2 people. So there was Snowfree Ellis Baxter. There was Vanessa Meltz. And on it went. And suddenly there it was. And we were all thinking, that's what we want. And then if we, so I don't know what it's called really, but I suppose it's risking, because I have done some truly dreadful broadcasts. There's no doubt about it at all. I mean, I was doing a Wimbledon program on the World Service, and the sport people looked at me and thought, why is he doing this program? It should be done by someone who knows jock itch and tennis balls. But the whole point was we were trying to go beyond, you know, we're trying to go beyond the normal tennis supporter.
Yes.
To talk about passion. Why do people love Roger Federer, for instance? I mean, and why do people are so tribal in tennis? Why is it the same people competing all the time? All those questions that sport people don't ask. But anyway, they made me sufficiently nervous that I did a trail at one point in which the words came out in the wrong order. So I would have to say that I do like the high wire part of it. I love to hear that it could go wrong. And one of my absolute heroes, Eddie Mair, I was doing a trail on PM to try and persuade people to listen to Broadcasting House. And it was, the bongs were approaching. It was all live. It was 10 seconds to the chimes of Big Ben. And Eddie Mair said, to close the program, we're going to have to leave it there because we're completely out of material. It's the end of the program. And then the bongs started. No one knew who was going to say that.
At some point, I've got to ask you about trees and the countryside. Has it been important to you at all? I know you go for regular walks with your dog, but
yes, totally, absolutely. I mean, I grew up in the countryside. My mum, who was widowed, as I've earlier explained, bought a small cottage on a farm, and we lived in it. But we were surrounded by countryside, and I used to walk all day, every day. And also as a boy, all I'd ever done was paint and draw trees. I was obsessed with trees. We lived in a wood, basically, near a giant wood. And so years passed. I went to live in America, and I lived in big cities. And then some years ago, I got myself another dog, Bob. the border terrier, in order to get me out. So I am now out twice a day, 365 days a year, seeking the walk I can make from my house. Then I've got a seat. He can sit on my bike. And so I'm always under a tree and looking at a tree. I'm surrounded by trees everywhere I go, even though I live in the centre of London, because of the amazing parks, which have saved everybody during lockdown, including me. And I know people are listening, who don't like London, but there's so many people who came before us, thought so hard about it. There are trees I walked among for your podcast, which have got to be 200 years old. So someone planted them, in the reign of perhaps George the Fourth, early Queen Victoria, someone planted the tree. And the more I learn about them, the more I am on the emotional scale. I'm not great with a tree that's lost all its leaves in the winter. I'm a bit fickle in that way. I love a summer oak tree, or I love a cherry blossom. I find it hard to fall in love with those trees when they're completely barren. I know that they are very beautiful to look at. But then recently someone told me that if trees on one side of an acre are drier than the trees on the other side of the acre, the trees will pass the water between themselves. They use the root system to transfer the water. And I said, you mean to tell me that trees can pass water between each other? Why has no one told me this? So then they're communicating. The trees are communicating. Well, they have to keep that secret from the public. That's subversion. I mean, all these Woodland Trust people probably know that, but I didn't know that.
Okay, so you've done a walk, you've recorded it. Just introduce it for us, please.
So this is my walk in Regent's Park, where I'm often, and I've fallen in love with the zoo, and I want to support the zoo, which is currently shut. So I'm not arguing that we do this for free, but you can see 10 species at least for free. Here we are, Adam, for your podcast. And the big question for me as I set off was, would the most special sound in London materialize for the Woodland Trust podcast, which is, would the lions roar or not?
Superbly laid up. Well, we'll find out.
This is one of my favourite discoveries since getting a dog. I'm walking under some cherry trees, which of course are naked of leaf and berry, but that's not the point. This is what I like to call my secret animal bottom tour of London. And when friends of mine have young children, I offer them the secret animal bottom tour of London, because I'm walking at the back of the zoo, meaning you can see a multitude of animals for free and indeed hear them. And obviously the joke for the children is that the animals are all facing the paying customers, so if you're here, you're only seeing their bottoms. You can see how funny any child over the age of 3 finds that. And so you can see, now I should say at this point that we should all, when we can, be supporting the zoos of the UK. So this is really a discovery from happier days when many a paying customer was within, so I'm not targeting the business here. But the first thing is that you can often hear the lions at feeding time. Sounds like a steam train slowing down at a station. And of course it's one of nature's wondrous sounds, and quite on cue for you, Adam. The Lord of the Jungle roared. Now, I never cease to be amazed that I can walk here from my home in about 20 minutes and hear a lion. In fact, I have seen it. You have to stand in a particular place, and I can never quite remember where. But isn't that amazing? I can walk and hear a lion roar. And it doesn't end there. Because on my Animal Ass tour, next come the goats. I'm still pretty flabbergasted that the lion roared just for the Woodland Trust podcast. I hope this will make my podcast the number one. All those other dreadful old celebrities splashing through the mud. How many of them have got a lion? Anyway, at this point you pass 3 little goats. I've learned a lot about goats, and that they basically are a very animated and fabulous animal to keep domesticated. Very useful in around feeding humans around the world, of course, but the goat has a lot of personality. Some are stubborn, some are flirtatious. So I hear. I've never myself been flirted at by a goat, but I'm just giving information for you. Bob has paused at this point, and I'm going to have to get out a poo bag. Bear with me a moment. Right, that job's done, pardon the pun. And now I'm walking past the camels. This is one of the most exciting signs in London, I think. It's a silhouette of a camel with a line running through it, saying, "Please don't feed me. Please don't feed us. We are on special diet, and the wrong foods can make us ill." And they have a very nice nose bag. Now, this is the amazing perch of the Siberian tiger. And many's the time I've lucked out and seen the tiger. You've already had the lion roar, so you don't get the tiger on display for your podcast, Adam. But I've often stood here and again thought, I could have got on the number 24 bus, but I'm actually now looking into the eyes of a tiger. A real tiger. And in fact, if the trees are bare enough, you can also see the neck of a giraffe from this spot. So I've sometimes had a camel, a giraffe and a tiger. Now these are the new additions, the gibbons. They make a loud shriek, and they're not out today because it's brass monkeys weather. In fact, that's one of the great misnomers of the public who go by. They always say to their kids, "Oh, look, a monkey." Because I can read the word gibbon in 6-foot-high letters, I always want to say to them, no, it's not a monkey, that's a gibbon. But being British, of course, I never say anything of the sort. I just smile. Maybe even saying to the children, "What a nice monkey." Inside, knowing all along it's actually a gibbon. So we wish the zoo very well because it's faced an awful time. It did once get me into the news, this Animal Bottoms tour, because it had a fire which claimed animals, including an aardvark, unfortunately, and I was on scene watching as the smouldering embers of the roof were put out. So I come here twice a day, 365 days a year, and I always see something new, all framed by these beautiful trees, currently bare, with the tweeting of the tits. You, listening to this, will know what this bird is, which I can't see. It's far off. It's amazing how the ivy lives up to its evergreen reputation. It's terribly cold. Everything is bare except for this dark green ivy, which also carpets the floor up this end of the park. And I often wonder, does it work well for a tree to have ivy on it? Because obviously homeowners can get very fretful about ivy, and I wonder, does a tree benefit from the right kind of ivy? Some of the trees here, if there were two of us, Adam, if you were here and you stood on one side and outstretched your arms and I stood on the other, obviously wearing a full wetsuit to avoid contamination, we couldn't touch our arms. Three of us could. A tree here with the breadth of three people linking arms with the trunk in the circle. It's very exciting to know that that tree's been there for, clearly 100 years and more. And it's got a partner up here the same. Now, one thing I hope that comes out of this collaboration for me is that when I was a boy, all I ever did in art class was draw trees. And I bought the Observer Book of Trees, and by the time I was about 10, I could name every tree from the shape and, of course, the leaf, but not the leaf, from the shape of the thing and the bark. And among the many things that I was better at when I was a child, that's one of them, because I've now lost that basic knowledge, I'm ashamed to say, on this podcast. And I'm walking down an avenue of trees, and I'd be lying if I wanted to name them, but I can tell you there are at least 10 different species here. One of them has got that very thick, ridged bark that looks like it's been poured like chocolate over a pudding. Very ridged, deep bark and drooping boughs. Whereas just next to it, standing to attention, is a tall tree all of whose boughs point skyward. And then there's definitely a gnarled old oak off in the distance there. So perhaps next time, someone on the Woodland Trust podcast will give me the best way to spot trees with no leaves. But for now, amazed by my serendipitous lion action, I'm going to call this little recording to an end, as the sky is grey and the snow beneath me is white and the trees all around are bare. Thank you very much for including me on your fabulous podcast. I wish you all the best with it and those lovely people at the Woodland Trust. Over and out.
So that was amazing. So, I mean, you're doing lots of very exciting stuff. You have your regular broadcasting house, one of the best programs on Radio 4. So if people haven't listened to that, they definitely should. It does amazing things, slow radio, and there are all sorts of weird stuff. What's going on at the moment on the program you like best?
Well, we do find the slow radio is a gift that keeps on giving, because people do send things from all over the world about what the sound of their life, and it's just taken on this type of. I'm sure there are people who hate it, but we just every week we come to work and there's all these new things, like a letter, like an old-fashioned bag of letters. You know, it's fabulous to get, and then you see about people's life and what interests them. It's been amazing time to be in people's lives and hearing from them about what matters.
I know you're not doing Should You Be Afraid of Your Sausage, but anything else we should look out for?
Yes, absolutely. I'm definitely trying to get a new series off the ground at the moment. But one of the problems I've got is that I think people are going to so much want to not talk about this period in the future. Do you know what I mean? I was going to write a book about lockdown, but I thought, no, I mean, I'd rather eat my own spectacles than go through that. So yeah, I'm looking for a sort of life affirming series for myself on radio, and then a little book I'm talking about based on the letters I've received over the last year.
Well, that was brilliant. Well, look, best of luck with that, and it's been a real pleasure to talk to you after quite a while. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Adam.
Thank you for listening to the Woodland Trust Woodland Walks. Join us next month when Adam will be taking another walk in the company of Woodland Trust staff, partners and volunteers. And don't forget to subscribe to the series on iTunes or wherever you're listening to us, and do give us a review and a rating. And why not send us a recording of your favourite woodland walk to be included in a future podcast? Keep it to a maximum of 5 minutes, and please tell us what makes your woodland walk special. Or send us an email with details of your favourite walk and what makes it special to you. Send any audio files to podcast@woodlandtrust.org.uk, and we look forward to hearing from you.